When Joffrey Baratheon defended Margaery Tyrell against his own mother in Season 3, Episode 1, Valor do Hierus, and dismissed Cersei Lannister's concern with the casual cruelty only a son can deliver, something irreversible happened in that room. Cersei had spent 18 years building the only form of power available to a woman in Westeros, the power of being indispensable to a king.
The king barely escaped with his life.
My mother's always had a penchant for drama.
In 60 seconds of dinner conversation, she discovered that someone had quietly, surgically made her dispensable. The dinner table. Every beat, every calculation, every silent wound. It opens with Joffrey arriving late and apologizing to Margaery. Not to his mother, not to Laura, to Margaery. He then immediately compliments her gown.
That's a lovely gown, my lady.
That's a lovely gown, my lady. Cersei intercepts instantly with a barb wrapped in a compliment.
Yes, it suits you perfectly. I imagine you might be rather cold.
Yes, it suits you perfectly. I imagine you might be rather cold. She is not commenting on fabric. She is commenting on neckline. She is telling Margaery, in front of the king, that she is underdressed for a queen. Margaery's response is flawless.
The climate is a bit more forgiving back in Highgarden, Your Grace.
The climate is a bit more forgiving back in Highgarden, Your Grace. Warm, smiling, entirely unruffled. And then Joffrey pivots immediately to offer her a shawl. He is choosing sides in a two-line exchange. Cersei has been outmaneuvered at the first sentence and the tour has barely started. We have officially launched our Discord server, a dedicated space for us to break down theories, discuss those mind-blowing Westeros scenes, and for you to tell me directly what you want to see next on the channel. It's completely free and built for the real fans. The link is right there in the description. Come join the council. She is warning Margaery, in front of Joffrey, that Flea Bottom is dangerous. She is reminding her, without stating it directly, of the bread riots. Not long ago, we were attacked by a mob there. We had a full complement of guards that didn't stop them. The king barely escaped with his life. This is Cersei's strongest move in the scene. She is invoking genuine danger. She is positioning her concern as the practical wisdom of a woman who survived what Margaery has not yet faced. It is, objectively, a reasonable point. Flea Bottom had nearly killed them. Margaery is walking into that neighborhood with toys and bread like it is a garden party, and then Joffrey destroys her. His response comes without hesitation. My mother's always had a penchant for drama. Facts become less and less important to her as she grows older. Our lives were never truly in danger. Read that again slowly. He calls his mother dramatic. He says her grasp of facts deteriorates with age. He says their lives, which Tyrion personally had to organize a retreat to save during an actual riot, were never truly in danger. He is not disagreeing with a political point. He is dismissing his mother's intelligence in public at her own dinner. Cersei's response is one of the most careful lines she delivers in the series. You're right, of course, but you are your father's son. We can't all have a king's bravery. She is retreating while driving a dagger in. The compliment is so obviously sarcastic that everyone at the table hears it, but the moment has already passed. Joffrey does not register the blade because he is not listening to her anymore. He is listening to Margaery. Margaery closes the scene's political argument with surgical economy. Hunger turns men into beasts. I'm glad House Tyrell has been able to help in this regard. They tell me 100 wagons arrive daily now from the Reach. IMDb's trivia for this episode notes that there is actually an audio dub in this line. She clearly mouths 1,000 wagons, but the track says 100. Regardless of the number, the move is perfect. She has just reminded everyone at the table that it's Tyrell grain feeding King's Landing, that the city's basic survival is currently dependent on her family, and she delivered it with complete pleasantness, as if she were discussing the weather. Joffrey's final word on the matter. Well, as Ser Loras said, Lady Margaery has done this sort of charitable work before. I'm sure she knows what she's doing. Cersei's reply, I'm sure she does, is the sound of a woman who has just understood, fully and completely, that the game has moved without her. The intelligence operation Margaery ran before any of this, what Sansa told them. What makes Margaery's performance at that dinner table even more impressive is what I found when I went back and traced the preparation that preceded it. Margaery and the Tyrells did not walk into King's Landing blind. They ran an intelligence operation, and their primary source was sitting right there in the Red Keep, isolated and frightened and desperate to be seen as useful. Sansa Stark. In Season 3, Episode 2, Olenna Tyrell insisted that Sansa tell them the truth about Joffrey. While Sansa was initially reluctant to share her feelings, she admitted that Joffrey was a monster since he had reneged on his earlier promise to spare her father's life. While Olenna was disappointed at these revelations, she was not surprised given the rumors that had been circulating about Joffrey's public outbursts. This is the moment that reframes the entire Flea Bottom visit and the dinner that followed. Margaery already knew from the most reliable possible source that Joffrey was not simply difficult, he was genuinely sadistic. That assessment did not cause her to rethink the marriage. It informed her strategy. The Flea Bottom visit, the bread wagons, the compliment about the gown, None of it was improvised. It was built on a precise understanding of what Joffrey lacked and what Cersei had failed to provide. Think about what that actually means in terms of Margaery's position at that dinner. While Cersei was sitting across from her trying to figure out what she was dealing with, Margaery had already done the full diagnostic. She knew his vanity was the primary lever. She knew he was insecure about the small folks' hatred. The bread riot had been a public referendum on his reign, and someone had thrown excrement at the king's face while the crowd chanted for his rivals. That humiliation had calcified into contempt for the people, but underneath the contempt was the wound of not being wanted. Margaery had designed her entire opening move in King's Landing to address that wound specifically. She was not going to flea bottom to be kind. She was going to flea bottom to build the asset that Cersei had never thought to build, the crowd's love. And then she was going to bring it to the dinner table. Why Margaery could do what Cersei could not. The core difference. When I analyzed the contrast between the two women's approaches to Joffrey, the distinction I kept arriving at is this: Cersei managed him as a mother. Margaery managed him as a strategist. And in the political world of King's Landing, strategy beats maternal instinct every time. Particularly when the maternal instinct has been spent indulging rather than correcting. Cersei's fundamental liability was that she actually loved Joffrey. And love, in this specific context, was working against her. She flinched at his cruelty because some part of her recognized it as wrong, even while she enabled it. She indulged him because she could not bear to be the target of his rage. Every decision she made about Joffrey was distorted by what she needed from him emotionally, his dependency, his continued positioning of her as the central figure in his life. As TV Trope's character analysis of Cersei noted, she certainly was this, at least partially, to Joffrey, as her spoiling of him and doing nothing to curb his negative traits, instead allowing or even encouraging them, combined with Robert's neglect, is in no small part responsible for him being such a cruel, vicious, and sadistic little shit. The thing that produced Joffrey was also the thing that made her unable to control him. Margaery had no such liability. She did not love Joffrey. She understood him. That is a completely different relationship, and it produces completely different results. Where Cersei occasionally flinched, Margaery never did, because she had no emotional stake in who Joffrey was. She only had a strategic stake in who he could be made to appear to be. And that meant she could lean into his psychology without reservation. She validated his grandiosity so completely, telling him his bravery at Blackwater was the talk of the realm, treating his cruelty as the natural expression of kingly seriousness, that she left no insecurity for Cersei to occupy. As HBO Watch's analysis of Margaery's political strategy put it, unlike the more obviously ruthless players like Cersei Lannister, Margaery's power lay in her ability to present multiple faces to different audiences. Cersei had only one face for Joffrey, the mother's face. Margaery had as many faces as the situation required. There is also an asymmetry in what each woman was willing to engage with. Cersei understood that she needed the small folk to be quiet, not loved. She viewed the question of public approval as a threat to be managed rather than a resource to be built. Like Joffrey, she can't see the advantages in courting positive publicity with the small folk. Margaery understood that in a city that had nearly eaten its king alive during a bread riot, the love of the people was the most durable political insurance available. Cersei had spent 2 seasons not feeding the city. Margaery arrived with wagons of grain from the Reach and walked into the poorest neighborhood in King's Landing with toys for orphans. It was not charity. It was infrastructure. She was laying the groundwork for a reign that could survive the specific catastrophe that Cersei's had produced. The moment Cersei saw it, what Lena Headey's silence actually said. What I find most compelling when I go back through this dinner scene frame by frame is not the dialogue, it is the silence. The words are important, every line is a move, but the real story of what Cersei Lannister understood in this scene is told entirely through Lena Headey's face during the moments when she has no lines. There is a specific B after Joffrey dismisses her concern about the bread riots. He has just called her dramatic, questioned her grasp of facts, and implied that her perception degrades with age, all while sitting across from a woman who actually did manage the retreat from that riot and kept the royal family alive. Headey does not give Cersei a reaction. She gives her a calculation. The face does not crumple. It does not harden into rage. It performs a kind of controlled neutrality that is more devastating than either of those responses because it tells you that Cersei is already processing, already moving from the emotional wound to the strategic question of what this means and what comes next. As one reviewer noted at the time, I especially like the dinner scene where we see Queen Cersei being supplanted by Margaery in the eyes of Joffrey. Cersei can no longer control Joffrey, but perhaps Margaery is up to the task? That question, embedded in a review published the day after the episode aired, captures exactly what Cersei is working through in those silent beats. The most telling moment comes after Joffrey delivers his final endorsement of Margaery's charitable work. He says he is sure she knows what she is doing. And Cersei says, perfectly flat, perfectly contained, I'm sure she does. That line is not a concession. It is a diagnosis. She has just finished running the full assessment. Margaery knows what she is doing. That is the problem. Cersei has been managing a son who did not know what he was doing and had no one else telling him either. She had spent 18 years being the only informed person in Joffrey's life. The moment she recognized that Margaery was also informed, more informed and better positioned, was the moment the dinner became a defeat. As a result of this dinner, Cersei realizes that Margaery is adept at winning the hearts and minds of her people, a skill which Cersei lacks. That is not a realization that came from any single line. It came from watching every line delivered in sequence and understanding that she was watching a performance she could not match. The true cost. What Cersei understood she had already lost. When I step back from this dinner scene and look at what it actually represents in the architecture of Season 3, what I keep coming back to is this. It is not the moment Cersei lost Joffrey. It is the moment she realized she had already lost him. Sometime earlier, in small increments, without ever seeing a single dramatic turning point to defend against. That is what makes the scene so quietly devastating. There was no battle to fight. Margaery did not challenge Cersei directly. She simply came to dinner more prepared. The structural irony of Cersei's entire relationship with Joffrey is that the thing which made her indispensable to him in the early seasons, her willingness to enable his worst tendencies, to provide cover for his cruelty, was precisely the thing that left him vulnerable to Margaery's approach. She had given him no experience of being genuinely admired. She had given him no practice at being loved rather than feared. So when Margaery offered him something no one in his life had ever offered him, full, unqualified engagement with his psychology directed toward a goal he actually wanted, he had no immunity to it. Cersei had built a son who could only be managed through need. Margaery built a